The ridge stood silent. The wind crawled low across the dry ridge line, dragging dust like old memories. Cracked yucca stalks bowed under the last weight of sun, their shadows long and skeletal. From the hills above, a hawk circled without sound, dipping once toward the carcass of a jackrabbit and then rising, unsatisfied. Lynn McCrae rode beneath that hawk, hat low, rifle tied to the saddle. His horse, ash gray and steady, picked its way among the rocks without needing a tug. The man in the saddle looked carved out of the same stone as the bluff. All lines, no softness. His face bore a stillness that did not shift with the wind or the hour. He wasn't out here for cattle. There were none left. Up near the shale cliffs where pinyon pine clung to cracks in the earth, he stopped. A blackbird screeched and flared into the air. Something below had stirred. At first he saw only blood, smeared against the sandstone like a paintbrush had trembled. Then a motion, the brief rise and fall of a small chest, breath catching on the edge of pain. A boy lay half hidden in the scrub, his skin burnt copper, hair thick with dirt and dried blood. An arrow shaft was broken off at the shoulder. His hand gripped a knife, too tightly for death. The boy couldn't have been more than 10. McCrae dismounted slowly. His boots met the earth with the sound of finality. For a long while he did not move, only looked. The way a man might study something he didn't ask for and couldn't walk past. The sun slipped down behind the hills. In the growing dusk, the sky burned orange. Then McCrae moved. He knelt, took the knife gently from the child's hand, wrapped it in cloth, and placed it in his saddlebag. The ridge fell into shadow. Coyotes howled far off. Somewhere in the boy's breath, there was still fight. McCrae lifted him without a word. The boy slept in fits. Curled by the hearth like a stray animal too long in the wild, he flinched at every groan of timber, every gust of wind prying at the chinks in the cabin wall. His bandaged leg twitched beneath the quilt, fever bleeding from his brow in slow beads that caught the firelight. Elias watched from the shadows. He hadn't touched the rocker since his wife died, but now he sat in it like he never left. The creak of wood beneath him matched the wind's whine, and still he said nothing. His rifle leaned beside the door. The boy's blade, a crude obsidian thing, rested on the table like a question left unanswered. The stew had gone cold. Outside, snow whispered down, but not soft. It fell straight and harsh, like judgment. In the lantern light, Elias studied the boy's face. Brown skin gone pale with fever, lips chapped raw. His hair was matted with old blood and pine needles, his body too thin beneath the ragged shirt. The stitched wound on his thigh had stopped bleeding, but it hadn't stopped burning. The boy woke once, startled. His eyes met Elias's, wide and wild, and for a breath the cabin felt like it might split in two. But then the boy turned his face to the wall, breath shallow and fast like a hunted thing too tired to run. Elias didn't move. Instead, he rose slowly and fetched a rag soaked in snowmelt, then pressed it to the boy's brow. Not gently, not cruelly, just necessarily. The boy didn't pull away. Outside, wolves howled from the ridge, and in the long silence that followed, Elias looked at the boy not as a threat, not as a burden, but as something else entirely. Something broken, like the land, like himself, dragged in by the wind and asking, without a word, if there was room left for anything more than ghosts. Понял тебя? Вот корректный заголовок и полный текст. By morning, the boy had not spoken. He sat upright now, propped against the wall with the quilt wrapped around him, like bark grown from stone. His eyes followed Elias across the room, not with fear this time, but with something older, heavier, like judgment. Elias moved without looking at him. He poured oats into a pot, stoked the coals back to life. Steam rose slow from the cast iron, softening the cold corners of the cabin. Outside, the snow had thickened, blurring the edge of the world into a white hush. The ridge was gone from sight. The boy's hands rested in his lap, still but not relaxed, not trusting. Fingers curled like claws forgotten how to let go. His right foot barely touched the floor, stiff with pain. The blood had seeped through the bandage again during the night. Elias brought him a bowl and set it on the floor near his feet. He didn't wait. He didn't explain. He returned to the window and watched the hills. The boy didn't touch the food. Instead, he stared at it, then at Elias. then back again, as if testing whether this too might be a trick. Finally, after long minutes, he reached out, every movement slow, deliberate, like a man gutting a snake. He ate in silence. Steam rose between them like smoke from different fires, and still no word passed. But something shifted, not softened, just shifted. Elias stepped outside. The cold bit instantly. Snow climbed his boots, wind stung his neck. He scanned the hills, the line of the trees. Empty. Too empty. Tracks from the night before were gone, erased clean by storm. Only the path down from the ridge remained faintly marked, like a scar that hadn't fully healed. But he saw no shapes in the trees, no motion in the wind. Still, something sat wrong in his gut. He turned back toward the cabin and saw the boy watching him from the window, the bowl now empty, resting between his hands like something sacred and unfamiliar. The firelight flickered low as night deepened, casting long shadows that danced against the rough-hewn walls. Elias sat near the hearth, sharpening a worn hunting knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The rhythm was steady, meditative, as if each scrape of the stone against steel carved away a piece of the heavy silence. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Somewhere far off, the ridge's outline was just a dark blur against the starless sky. Smoke from distant fires curled upward. Silent signals in the cold night. The boy watched Elias from the corner, wrapped in the quilt, but no longer trembling. His eyes were fixed, unreadable, a flicker of something guarded and fierce beneath the quiet exhaustion. Elias finally looked up, meeting the boy's gaze. His hands paused, the knife stilling mid-stroke. No words came, none were needed. Instead, Elias reached over and set a small bundle of dried herbs on the table, sage and sweetgrass, gathered on a rare walk through the snow. It was a peace offering, a gesture woven from respect rather than speech. The boy's fingers twitched toward the herbs, hesitated, then closed gently around the bundle. A fragile bridge between two worlds, fragile as the flame's last glow before the night swallowed it whole. Dawn broke pale and cold over the ridge. Frost clung to every branch, and the silence outside pressed heavy against the cabin walls. Elias rose early, stepping softly to avoid waking the boy. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air as he opened the door. The world was still, save for the distant crackle of wood settling in the fire pit. Elias moved toward the edge of the clearing, eyes scanning the horizon where the ridge rolled into the far-off hills. He found fresh tracks in the snow, small, deliberate prints that spoke of cautious movement. They led away from the cabin, weaving toward the dense forest, then disappeared beneath a blanket of white. Returning inside, Elias found the boy sitting on the floor, quietly mending the torn edges of his worn leather moccasins. The wound on his leg was cleaner, but still raw, a constant reminder of the night's escape. Without a word, Elias handed him a small bundle wrapped in cloth, dried venison, and a carved wooden flute. The boy looked up, eyes narrowing, a flicker of gratitude and something unspoken passing between them. Outside, smoke began to rise from the ridge once more. Fires kindled not far from the horizon, their glow promising both danger and a story yet to be told. The day stretched heavy and quiet. Inside the cabin, Elias and the boy moved in cautious rhythm, sharing the space without words. The boy's hands worked steadily, mending, carving small figures from scraps of wood, tracing patterns that seemed to hold stories untold. Outside, the wind had shifted, carrying faint sounds, distant voices, the low murmur of horses, the steady beat of drums rolling over the ridge like thunder in the distance. Elias stiffened, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The fires from the night before had multiplied, flickering in the thinning dusk like restless spirits gathering. The boy looked up, meeting Elias's eyes for the first time with something like resolve. Without hesitation, Elias reached for his rifle and stepped outside, the cold biting through his coat as he scanned the ridge's edge. The hunt was coming, and with it, choices neither of them could avoid. Night descended fast, swallowing the landscape in shadow. The ridge above Elias's ranch burned bright, lines of fire stretching like veins against the dark. Elias stood at the cabin's edge, rifle steady in his hands, eyes tracing the flickering glow. The flames weren't random. They were signals, messages from a world that still fought for survival. The boy stood beside him, silent but alert. His wound was nearly healed, but his presence was more than flesh and bone. It was history, pain, and something fiercely alive. From the ridge, shapes moved, figures wrapped in shadows, horses snorting, warriors ready. Elias's jaw tightened. He knew the night would bring answers, but also danger. He stepped forward, voice low and steady. The boy met his gaze. No words passed, but trust was there, in the quiet, in the firelight. Together they faced the ridge ablaze, the past and future colliding in the smoke. The morning sun rose slow, casting pale light over the charred ridge. Smoke still curled from smoldering trees, twisting in the cold air like ghosts reluctant to leave. Elias and the boy moved through the blackened landscape, their footsteps careful over scorched earth. The boy's gaze was sharp, scanning the horizon with a warrior's instinct. They came upon the remnants of a camp, ashes, broken arrows, and trampled grass. Signs of recent struggle, silent witnesses to a battle neither had witnessed, but both felt deep in their bones. Elias knelt, brushing ash from a small carved token, a symbol of peace, or perhaps a plea. The boy reached out, fingers trembling as he took the token, holding it like a fragile memory. In that quiet moment, their worlds bridged again, not by words but by shared loss, and the fragile hope that healing might begin here, among the ruins. The wind whispered cold through the skeletal trees as Elias and the boy made their way back to the cabin. Each step felt heavier, laden with the weight of what they had seen, the ruins of a world scarred by endless conflict. Inside, the warmth of the hearth welcomed them, but silence hung thicker than the smoke curling from the chimney. The boy traced patterns in the dust on the wooden floor, his eyes distant yet focused, lost in memories only he could understand. Elias poured water into a bowl, then carefully tended the boy's still healing leg. Their movements were quiet rituals, small acts that spoke louder than any words. Outside, the ridge stood silent, the fires extinguished, but their glow still lingering in the shadows. A reminder that the past was never far, and the future was theirs to shape, fragile as the morning light. Chapter 10. The dawn was pale, filtering weakly through the frost-laced window panes. Elias moved with slow deliberation, breaking the silence that had settled like a fog. He stepped outside, the crisp air filling his lungs, sharp as the memories that haunted him. The boy followed, limping but determined, his gaze fixed on the distant ridge where new tracks had appeared overnight. Footprints, fresh and deliberate, etched in the snow like a silent warning. Elias's hand hovered near his rifle, muscles tense with cautious anticipation. The cold morning held its breath, waiting. Together they faced the ridge once more, knowing that what awaited was no longer a question of survival alone, but of trust, of choices that would bind their fates forever. The sun climbed higher, casting stark light on the rugged landscape. Elias and the boy had settled into a fragile rhythm, days measured by the work of the land, and nights by the quiet exchange of glances and shared silences. Today the boy ventured beyond the cabin for the first time in weeks, his steps cautious but sure. Elias watched from the doorway, the weight of past losses pressing on him, but beneath it, a flicker of hope. Near the edge of a frozen creek, the boy paused, kneeling to trace symbols in the snow, markings from his people, reminders of who he was and where he came from. Elias approached quietly, standing beside him without speaking. Their shadows stretched long and entwined, two figures bound by more than circumstance, a testament to endurance and the promise of a new path. A thick fog had settled over the valley, draping the world in a soft, gray veil. Inside the cabin, beside the flickering firelight, Elias and the boy exchanged quiet glances. Words felt unnecessary, even heavy. The boy carefully laid out before him a small collection of herbs, stones, and worn tokens. Symbols and talismans from his past, fragile threads linking two worlds. His fingers traced the familiar shapes with reverence, as if touching memory itself. Elias watched in silence, sensing that these simple acts were their new language, a way to speak without speaking, to build trust in the absence of words. Each gesture was a promise, an offering of peace. Outside, the fog stirred softly, as if breathed by ancient spirits. In this fragile stillness, the seeds of connection took root, fragile but alive, promising the slow, uncertain growth of hope and renewal. As the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls, both men understood that healing was not a sudden blaze, but a quiet, enduring warmth. Their shared silence spoke louder than any conversation ever could. The day began with a sharp wind, driving swirling snowflakes across the vast prairie. Elias and the boy stepped out from the cabin, their breaths forming short clouds that vanished quickly into the cold silence. The boy, now moving with steadier steps, headed toward the old oak tree at the forest's edge, a place where he always found some peace amid the chaos of his world. From beneath his cloak, he carefully pulled out a small bundle of carved wooden figures, each one holding memories and hopes wrapped in delicate shapes. Elias watched him quietly, feeling the weight of his own past settle deep in his chest, years of solitude and grief that had become part of their shared story. He understood that this bond was not just salvation for the boy, but also a lifeline for himself. Beneath the oak, the boy began arranging the figures on the snow, laying them out in a pattern that mirrored the ancient symbols of his tribe. For a moment it seemed as if the earth itself held its breath, listening to the silent conversation between two cultures, so different yet strangely connected. Elias moved closer and sat down beside him. He sensed how these small gestures formed a bridge between their worlds, between a past that could never be forgotten and a future they were cautiously trying to build together. Suddenly the wind stilled, and from deep within the forest came a distant sound, a low rhythmic drumbeat, muffled but steady. The boy stood, his eyes lighting with resolve. It was a call, a summons that could not be ignored. Elias rose as well, feeling the heavy weight of responsibility shift from one shoulder to the other. They could no longer hide in the shadows. The time had come to face those who had followed them, and to decide who they truly were now. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the frost-hardened earth as Elias and the boy ventured beyond the shelter of the cabin for the first time in days. Each step was careful, deliberate, part exploration, part test of strength. The boy's gaze flickered toward the ridge, where smoke still curled faintly against the pale sky, a lingering reminder of the fires that had blazed the night before. His fingers brushed the worn leather pouch at his side, a silent talisman from a life left behind. Elias noticed the subtle tension in the boy's posture, the balance between fear and resolve as they moved deeper into the quiet wilderness. The silence between them was no longer heavy but comfortable, filled with a growing understanding forged in shared hardship. At a small clearing by the creek, the boy knelt to examine a cluster of broken twigs and fresh tracks, signs that others were near, watching, waiting. Elias stepped close, placing a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder, wordlessly offering reassurance. Together they faced the unknown, their fates entwined like the intertwining roots beneath the frozen ground. Fragile, yet enduring. The twilight deepened as Elias and the boy returned to the cabin, the horizon painted with streaks of crimson and gold. Their footsteps left shallow imprints in the softening snow, each step a quiet echo of the journey they had traveled together, one marked by pain, trust, and a fragile hope. Inside, the fire burned low but steady, casting a warm glow that seemed to hold back the night's chill. The boy unpacked his belongings, laying out small keepsakes, carved tokens, a worn piece of cloth dyed in deep blue, the colors of his people and memories of home. Elias watched, feeling a rare stillness settle over him, a tentative peace born from shared silence and understanding. The shadows on the walls seemed less like ghosts and more like guardians now, witnesses to a new beginning. Outside, faint glimmers of light flickered along the ridge, small campfires, distant but steady, signaling that the world beyond their solitude still turned, still held stories yet to unfold. Together, Elias and the boy sat by the fire, the quiet crackle mingling with the rhythm of their breaths. In the hush of the closing day, two fractured souls found the strength to hope, to heal, and to imagine a future built not on loss, but on choice, respect, and the fragile power of trust.